defense ready with their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Mr. Cameron Lee to the stand. Before we proceed, may I set the well for use of the demonstrator?
You may. Proceed.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
My name is Cameron Lee, but you can call me Cam for short.
Mr. Lee, I want to start off by giving the members of the jury the chance to understand why you're here today. Are you currently employed?
A few months ago that would have been a hard question to answer, but right now I'm currently employed at Aflac Insurance. It's a boring job, it's an office job. Haven't seen one duck around the office, but I got released from my last job from Geico for the same reason, but I'm currently doing a good job for myself.
Mr. Lee, how'd you get involved in today's case specifically?
The weekend of July 13th and 15th, I happened to be at Calkins Campground doing a little bit of camping. It's one of my favorite pastimes, but just one of those other things I like to do alone by myself.
Mr. Lee, I want to talk about that weekend that you spent at the Calkins campground. Can you tell us what it was like when you first arrived there?
Oh, unlike today, it was so hot. It was about 96, 97 degrees outside, sweating bullets as soon as I got there. I ran into Armani Rodriguez to check in. Him and I go way back. He knows I'm an avid hiker. I come there all the time. And I was just there to mind my business for a little peaceful weekend of my riveting life.
Mr. Lee, can you tell us what the cellular service is like at the Calkins campground?
It's not awesome. It's a campground, so there's not a lot of cellular reception out there, and I hadn't used my phone all weekend anyway.
Mr. Lee, would you recognize a blown-up version of a map of Calkins campground if I showed it to you today?
I would, since I've been there many times.
Permission for the witness to step down and make use of the demonstrator.
Sure.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you.
Can you show us what trails you hiked on while you were at Calkins campground?
Well, I started at the Muskie Pond. It's not a trail, but it's like my favorite spot. And after that, I went to the Wagner Loop, and then after that, I tried the Lecron Loop, but did not successfully complete it.
Why weren't you able to complete it?
Oh, that trail, I mean, I know I called myself a hiker, but it's incredibly difficult. There's a lot of elevation and rocks and debris that you can fall over, and I didn't even bring my hiking shoes that day as I came right after work, so I forgot them.
Did you ever interact with Miss Ryder and her daughter Parker?
Yeah, a couple times.
When?
So the first time I had seen them, they were in a red pickup truck coming into camp around 12 o'clock. They were having some sort of conversation, maybe like a lighthearted argument in the car about like a radio station. Parker wanted to listen to Justin Bieber or something like that. And the mom, she didn't really want to listen to it, but it was lighthearted for sure.
Was that the last time that you saw Miss Ryder and her daughter Parker?
No, not at all.
When did you see them again?
So I was taking a lunch break after completing the Wagner Loop, and I saw them come near my picnic area.
Where were
They had just walked by. I didn't introduce myself. I said, "Hi, my name's Cam." They said, "Hello." And then Miss Ryder, she pulled her daughter along because she had fallen back a little bit, but she's a young kid, so she was probably just a little tired from how hot it was that day.
they? Mr. Lee, was that the last time that you saw them that day?
Parker, yes. Jordan, no.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, while I was taking my last excursion at the Muskie Pond, I noticed a bridge around 4:30, give or take a couple minutes. I saw Jordan cross the bridge, and then a few minutes afterwards, I heard another person follow right behind Jordan, but since there had been no one around the campsite that day, I just assumed it was Parker.
Well, how many people did you see at Calkins campground the weekend that you were there?
Only 4. It was Armani Rodriguez when I checked in. I saw Jordan and Parker the 2 times I had seen them. And then I also saw Mr. Kelly Dews. He had introduced himself to me very lightly, but we didn't make much conversation.
Mr. Lee, can you circle where you saw Miss Ryder and Parker Page around 4:30?
Well, I was at the Muskie Pond right here, if you don't mind me marking, and I saw them at the bridge located right here.
Permission for the witness to retake his seat.
Sure.
Now, Mr. Lee, what did you do after you left the Calvin's campground?
Oh, Aflac hooked me up with a nice little vacation. I took a trip to Aruba.
What did you do once you got back?
When I got back, I had received one voicemail from Detective Chesney, and she had let me know that something had happened at Calkins Campground. She just had a few questions to ask me afterwards, so she requested that I had come back.
Were you able to answer the detective's questions?
She only asked me a few questions, some of the questions that I couldn't really give a definitive answer to because I hadn't been around them that much that day. She asked me if I had seen Parker Page or where her whereabouts were. I also was asked if I knew how Parker Page went missing. I didn't know much information about that. And she also asked me what was I doing at Calkins Campground that weekend, just basic information.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor. Would you like me to deconstruct the demonstrative?
Can you read it out for just a little bit?
Absolutely.
Hello, Mr. Lee. I have a couple questions for you. You actually mentioned on your direct examination something about cell phone service.
Yes,
Now, what kind of cell phone service do you have?
I have Verizon.
Do you know what kind of cell phone service provider the defendant has?
I do not.
Do you know how well the service provider that the defendant has works?
There's no way I could know that information, no.
Now, you also mentioned that while you were at Calkins campgrounds, you saw 4 people, right?
I did.
Now, those were the only 4 people that you saw, right?
That weekend, yes.
Mr. Lee, you would agree with me that Calkins campgrounds is rather large, right?
Right?
And so, although you saw only 4 people, there could have been more, right?
It's a possibility, but like I said, it was pretty hot that day. I go there all of the time. It's populated most of the weekends that I go. It was rather odd that I had only seen 4 people that day.
All right, Mr. Lee. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the first time that you saw the defendant in Parker Page. You mentioned that they were having a lighthearted argument in the morning, right?
Yeah, it had something to do with the radio. It wasn't like a screaming match or anything, nothing like me and my ex-wife used to have.
Well, Mr. Lee, let's talk a little bit about that argument that you heard, right? When they passed by you, they were in a red Chevy truck, weren't they?
They were.
And
It was distinguishable too.
okay, so that truck was pretty loud, right?
There hadn't been a muffler on that car. It was so loud. It just drove past me and I even got startled a little bit and turned around.
The truck was so loud that you got startled, Mr. Lee?
Yeah, there's something wrong with the car noticeably.
So despite the fact that the car was so loud, you could still hear the defendant and Parker arguing, couldn't you? Right?
Their voices, yes.
Well, the truck was so loud that you could still hear what the defendant and Parker was still arguing about, right?
They were arguing about the radio, so it was coming on and off, and they were going back and forth, so it was easy to decide what they were saying.
Despite the fact that that truck was so loud, the defendant and Parker were arguing louder, weren't they?
You could say that, yes.
Well, you saw the defendant and Parker a little while later, right?
Yeah.
You saw them around 2:45 p.m.?
Yeah, while I was eating lunch, it was between 2:30 and 2:45.
And that's when you noticed that they were starting to hike up the Lacroix, right?
Yes. I don't know exactly where they were going, but that's when I had noticed them walk past my picnic area.
All right. When you noticed the defendant and Parker, you noticed that Parker was limping a little bit, right?
I noticed a slight limp, but I assumed it was just because they had been out there all day. And again, she was a little girl, it was hot.
Well, you also noticed that she was carrying a walking stick, didn't you?
Not entirely sure.
Would you like your memory to be refreshed, Mr. Lee?
Please, if you would.
Let the record reflect that I'm approaching the witness with their affidavit. Oh, Your Honor, I'm approaching the opposing counsel, please. It's all right.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee, I just handed you your affidavit, right?
Yes, you did.
That's your signature on the back of that affidavit?
It is.
Everything seems to be the same as when you last wrote it, right?
It does.
Mr. Lee, look at line 85. You can refresh your memory, and when you're ready, you can look at that. Let the record reflect that I'm approaching the witness to retrieve their affidavit. So, Mr. Lee, when you saw Parker, you saw her carrying a walking stick, didn't you?
She had a hiking staff, yes.
Now, you noticed that Parker was trailing behind the defendant, right?
Maybe by a few feet.
Well, in fact, you heard the defendant say, "Hurry up, we haven't even started the trail yet," right?
Right.
You like Calkins campgrounds, right?
I do. I'm a frequent goer.
You're pretty familiar with the trails?
Decently enough. I stay away from some of the more difficult ones.
When you saw the defendant and Parker going towards the Lacrone Loop, you thought that at that pace, they weren't going to be able to make it back to the camp before dark, right?
The little girl was moving so slow, she was telling her to hurry up. So it was an obvious assumption to make that they wouldn't have made it back.
Now, Mr. Lee, that was the last time that you saw Parker, right?
Yes.
But it wasn't the last time that you saw the defendant, was it?
No, it was not.
You saw the defendant again at around 4:30 p.m., right?
4:30, give or take a few minutes, yes.
And you saw the defendant walking back towards the campground?
Yeah, I was at the Muskie Pond, and there's a bridge that's visible right from that location. Not entirely visible, but I had definitely seen Jordan walk across that bridge.
And when you saw the defendant walk across that bridge, you noticed that they were carrying the hiking staff, right?
Yes, she did have the hiking staff.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect necessary, I just asked my witness to be allowed to step down.
Is the defense ready with the second witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the state calls Dr. Lopez to the stand. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself for the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Dr. Elaine Lopez.
Dr. Lopez, what do you do for a living?
Well, after graduating from Purdue University, I received my doctorate of medicine from the Emory School of Medicine. I've since practiced medicine across Midlands and was the chief medical examiner of Breckinridge County in Midlands for 21 years. And in 2015, I opened up my own private consulting firm.
And why are you here today?
I was called to testify to my analysis of the autopsy report that Dr. Quincy completed in preparation for today's trial.
What evidence did you review before conducting your analysis?
Well, in preparation for today's trial, I reviewed most of my conclusions were based on the autopsy report itself that Dr. Quincy completed. However, I also thoroughly reviewed Parker Page's medical history, Jordan Ryder's interrogation, several photos of Calkins Campground, along with a map of the campground.
Was this enough evidence to come to a conclusion?
More than enough. These are the standard kinds of materials myself or other forensic pathologists would typically rely on in a case like today's.
And did you apply any particular principles or methods in today's case?
Yes, today I applied the method that I always apply in cases like today's, the comparative autopsy analysis.
What's the comparative autopsy analysis?
The comparative autopsy analysis is where we take into consideration a medical examiner's autopsy report and as much physical evidence as possible and attest to the accuracy of that medical examiner's autopsy report, and it helps us come to conclusions like cause and time of death.
Is this method reliable within your field?
Yes, absolutely. Like I already said, this is the standard method that myself has used in all 1,000 autopsies that I have performed in cases I have worked in. This is the standard method that myself or other medical examiners would typically rely upon. It is the method that I reliably applied to today's case.
You mentioned that you read Dr. Quincy's report. What was your opinion on that?
Well, Dr. Quincy's initial autopsy report itself was actually inconclusive. It wasn't until 3 days after the physical autopsy had been completed that Dr. Quincy ruled Parker Page's death a homicide, and this was based solely on one singular bruise found present on the patient's body, and realistically, I believe this claim would be very premature and unsupported.
Why would that claim be premature and unsupported?
What we're here to dispute today is not how Parker Page died. Parker Page died from blunt force trauma to the head, which was sustained from her fall off of the Calkins Campground Macron Loop overlook. What we are here to dispute today is what caused Parker Page to fall from that cliff, and unfortunately, we will never be able to determine that to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. There's any number of ways that Parker Page could have fallen off of that cliff, and I believe the fact that this is not more thoroughly mentioned within the report is a serious omission on Dr. Quincy's part.
So what else could have caused Parker to fall?
Well, there's any number of things that could cause a child to trip or fall on a campground, and one feasible, even possible answer that I found present within Parker Page's medical history is her diagnosis of osteogenesis imperfecta. Now, more commonly known as OI, is brittle bone disease, and unfortunately, it can result in respiratory issues, which can result in breathing problems.
How could those breathing problems make Parker fall?
Well, if Parker was experiencing breathing problems while on the campground, there's any number of things that could have caused her to trip or fall. For example, she could have experienced a lack of oxygen to her brain and suddenly fainted. She could have become drowsy from not being able to breathe well, misstepped, and tripped. Realistically, she was suffering from a very severe bone disease that caused her breathing problems, and we'll never be able to rule this out as a cause of death.
So you mentioned earlier that there was a bruise on Parker's clavicle. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, so Dr. Quincy drew a lot of conclusions based on this one singular bruise. Dr. Quincy concluded that a hiking staff struck Parker Page, that hiking staff was held by someone else who struck her, and that strike is what caused her to fall off of the cliff. And realistically, there is not enough evidence to support this claim based solely on the shape and size of this bruise.
Could the bruise have been caused by anything else?
Realistically, yes. Parker Page sustained a fall off of a 40-foot cliff, and unfortunately, without someone physically there watching Parker Page and how she fell, we will never be able to determine to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty exactly how all of those injuries were sustained.
So, Dr. Lopez, what was your overall conclusion in today's case?
Unfortunately, in the case of the late Parker Page, we will never be able to determine to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty exactly how Parker Page died. The evidence in today's case does not support one theory more than the other.
Thank you. With that, I have no further questions.
Right, yes. Close this in?
Yes, Your Honor, may I take a moment to set up a visual read?
You may.
May I proceed?
You may.
Dr. Lopez, in your opinion, it was possible that Parker Page suffered from a more severe form of brittle bone disease, right?
Yes, that's absolutely a possibility. We're not able to determine that completely conclusively.
Well, in your opinion, it was possible that Parker Page suffered from type 2 or type 3, right?
Yes, at the very least, she was suffering from a severe form of osteogenesis. Whether that was type 1 or type 3, it doesn't really make a difference.
Well, Parker Page was diagnosed with type 1, right?
Yes, she was.
And this is overall the least severe form.
Yes, it is.
But if Parker Page were, as you say, possibly suffering from a more severe form, she could have had breathing problems, right?
Yes, absolutely. However, breathing problems and respiratory issues are present within osteogenesis type 1 as well.
Well, with these more severe breathing problems due to a potentially more severe type of the disease, she'd have trouble doing strenuous exercise, wouldn't she?
I wouldn't be able to say with certainty, but yes, that's absolutely a possibility.
Well, it's likely, isn't it?
It is.
And it would be difficult for Parker Page, if she did suffer from a more severe type of brittle bone disease, to make strenuous hikes, wouldn't it?
I wouldn't be able to say for certain, but that's absolutely a possibility of a symptom that is common with osteogenesis imperfecta.
You're familiar with the map of Calkins Campground, right?
Yes, I am.
And you know that on maps, these lines indicate elevation, right?
Yes.
And these lines up here indicate a higher level of elevation, right?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So it would follow that the Lacroix Loop has areas that are very high elevation, right?
Yes, that is my understanding by looking at this map.
Additionally, it is harder to breathe as you go further up, right?
Yes.
So Dr. Lopez, if Parker Page did suffer from a more severe type of brittle bone disease, she would likely be unable to hike this trail without significant assistance. Isn't that right?
Yes, that is very likely. Regardless of the type of OI that she was suffering from, it could have been very difficult for her. You were right.
In fact, it would be unlikely that she could do it alone. Isn't that right?
That's very possible, yes.
So let's move on to your conclusions regarding Dr. Quincy's autopsy.
All right.
You were hired by defense counsel to review this autopsy, right?
Yes, I was. This is the standard kind of case that I typically am hired to work on.
Dr. Quincy concluded that a bruise over Parker Page's left collarbone was likely caused before her death, right?
Yes.
And you agree that this is the most likely explanation for that injury, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. However, there's no real way to rule out that that injury was not sustained during the fall, which I consider that, since Dr. Quincy did not put that into report, I would consider that to be a serious omission.
Well, Dr. Lopez, regardless if there was another possibility, you think that Dr. Quincy's conclusion was the most likely explanation, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. However, I believe it's important that we factor in all possible causes of Parker's death, which is why I would have added that into the autopsy report if I was the medical examiner who performed the autopsy.
Dr. Lopez, in Dr. Quincy's report, she also concluded that Parker Page's time of death was likely between 4 and 6 p.m. on July 14th, right?
Yes, she did.
And again, you agree that this is the most likely explanation, right?
Yes, absolutely. However, just like with the previous part, there's other theories that were not explored within the actual report itself, and at this time, we cannot rule out that she did not die between 7 to 9, even though 4 to 6 is the most likely answer.
Let's talk a little bit about your background, Dr. Lopez.
Absolutely.
You're charged the highest consultant rates in Midlands, as far as you know, right?
Yes, well, as far as I know, I'm the only person who has 21 years of chief medical examiner experience, so yes,
Currently you work at a private firm as a consultant, right?
I do.
But as you said, previously you were the chief medical examiner, weren't you?
Yes, and I actually hired Dr. Quincy while I was the chief medical examiner of Breckinridge County.
And you held this position for over 20 years, didn't you?
Yes.
But you didn't leave that position of over 20 years voluntarily, did you?
No.
In 2012, you discovered that a colleague had made significant errors during an autopsy, didn't you?
Yes, this is correct. The significant errors did not affect the cause and time of the death of the patient, so I issued a personal reprimand to this employee.
But Dr. Lopez, regardless of whether you issued a private reprimand, you didn't tell your superiors about these errors, did you?
No, I was the chief medical examiner. I was the superior.
We didn't tell defense counsel from the case did you?
No, the errors did not affect the cause or time of death, and the case had already closed, so it was not necessary.
Dr. Lopez, you'd agree with me that it's important to be accurate on an autopsy, wouldn't you?
Yes, absolutely, which is why after my student made this mistake, I made them practice that mistake on, it must have been 100 cadavers. I made sure they would never make it again.
And you agree that, that transparency is important in the field of medicine, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
But you didn't tell anyone about these errors.
No, it wasn't necessary.
In 2014, so about 2 years later, the defendant from that case was granted federal habeas relief, weren't they?
Yes,
And as you know, I'm sure, federal habeas relief means a wrongful conviction.
yes.
And after this defendant was granted federal habeas relief, a reporter asked you if you had any knowledge about the mistakes in the autopsy, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Despite knowing it was a lie, you said no, didn't you?
Oh, I would never disclose information of a case to a reporter like that, so I absolutely said no.
Well, Dr. Lopez, you still agree that transparency is important in the medical profession?
Oh, absolutely, but that does not mean that we need to be sharing case facts to reporters that has.
But at this point, you still hadn't told anyone else about these errors, had you?
No, and it was shortly after the reporter came and spoke to me that the personal reprimand went public and I was fired from my job.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. I have no further questions. Would opposing counsel like me to put the visual weight away?
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked the witness allowed to step down.
Thank you.
Is defense ready with its last witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense would like to call Ms. Jordan Ryder to the stand. Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
My name is Jordan Ryder.
Ms. Ryder, have you been in court throughout the entirety of today's trial?
Yeah, I have.
Have you heard the accusations against you?
I have.
Ms. Ryder, I have to ask, did you murder your own daughter?
No. Parker was the light of my life. She was my everything. I can't even imagine hurting that little girl. The worst part about all of this is I just keep hearing accusation after accusation. I'm not getting any answers to any of my questions. I just want to know how my little girl died.
Well, I want to start by talking about your relationship with your daughter. How old were you when you had Parker?
I was 17. I was practically a kid myself, but what I thought was going to ruin my life ended up probably being one of the best things that ever came into it. Parker was just this little ball of light, and I would do anything for her.
How were you able to afford taking care of Parker?
To be blunt, I wasn't. I was a single mom by the time that Parker was 2. My parents had passed away, and so did my husband, Terry. I didn't know where our next meals were coming from, and that terrified me. I ended up getting involved in some stupid mistakes to take care of her, and I ended up having to go away for a little bit because of it.
Well, during your time away, Ms. Ryder, were you able to keep in contact with your daughter?
I was. She came to visit me about every other week, and then she started coming a little bit less, but we wrote letters back and forth to each other.
Why did you write these letters?
Parker was sick. She had osteogenesis imperfecta, or brittle bones disease, and when Parker came to see me, sometimes she would smile less. She wasn't laughing as much. I could tell that she was getting really down. So I just wanted to make her feel stronger, let her know that I believed that she was the best person and that she could do anything she put her mind and heart to.
How did you do that?
Well, in our letters, I told her that when I was back and when I could see her again, we would go on all these adventures, and she would be my little superhero, and we would be able to build our bond and take on the world together.
Let's talk about your trip to Calkins Campground, Ms. Ryder. Why did you decide to go camping?
Well, Parker and I had always wanted to go on these adventures, and camping was something that was realistic for us. The Calkins Campground is right here in Midlands, so I thought it would be a good choice. And Parker had always wanted to go camping when she was little, but I wasn't able to take her, so it was going to be a fun little trip for us.
Do you know what time you arrived?
We got there at around noon. We checked in with the campsite owners, and then we went and set up our tents.
Did you hike any of the trails at Calkins Campground on July 14th?
Yes, after we set up camp, probably around 2:30ish, we went onto the Lacrone Loop.
While you were on the Lacrone Loop, were you able to get cell phone service?
No, Parker was throwing a fit about it too. That girl is attached to her technology, and she kept complaining. I had bought her this hiking staff, and she was amusing herself with that instead. I thought she was going to use it to walk with, but all she really wanted to do was use it as a toy.
Ms. Ryder, do you know if Parker's phone was able to get cell phone service while you were on the Lacrone Loop?
No, she didn't say anything about getting service until we were at the campsites.
Ms. Dews, how far did you make it up the Lacrone Loop?
Well, we never really made it to the overlook, and that's what we were trying to get to. We probably were approaching it, but by the time we got there, Parker was whining a lot. She was jabbing everything with her hiking staff, and she actually tripped at one point. And I thought it would be best if we turned around.
Were you here in court today when Kelly Dews took the stand?
Yes, I was.
Did you hear Mr. Dews testify that he saw you by the overlook?
Yes, I was a little bit confused just because Parker and I didn't ever make it to the overlook, but we were heading towards there when we had stopped.
Right, so did you hear Mr. Dews say that he saw you as he was approaching the overlook?
Yes.
So what happened after you had approached the overlook?
Parker and I got into a little bit of an argument. I thought it was best we go back down. She got upset. She said some pretty hurtful things to me, but ultimately it was just the best decision that we both turned back. I ended up taking the hiking staff from her so she could focus on just walking on the trails and not trip or hit anything with it, and we headed back down to our camps.
Were you here in court today when Cameron Lee took the stand?
I was.
Did you hear Mr. Lee testify that he saw you cross that bridge?
I did hear him say that.
Did you hear Mr. Lee testify that he heard somebody else cross the bridge behind you?
Yes, Parker was walking behind me. I kept my eye on her the entire time, but I thought it would be best for us to stay a little bit separated, give us some time to cool down after having a little fight.
To your knowledge, would you be able to get cell phone service near the bridge?
Yes, I think Parker had talked about when we got back to camps about finally getting service again, so.
Ms. Ryder, what happened when you got back to camp?
When we got back, Parker was a little upset with me still. She didn't really want to be at the camp. She didn't really want to, do all the work and go on hikes, and she just kind of wanted to lay around. And I told her that we should take time to think. She should go in her tent, I should go in mine, and we should practice some breathing exercises that I had learned, take some time to cool down, and get back together when we were both in a better headspace.
Were you able to do that?
I had went back to my tent for a little while, and when I went to go check on Parker, she wasn't there.
What'd you do?
At first I wasn't concerned. I thought that maybe she had just went back to the bridge to take some pictures, or maybe she went and just went for a little bit of a walk, but after I couldn't find her, I started panicking. I didn't know where she went, so I started walking around some trails. I walked around the pond. I tried looking at any campsites, but I couldn't find her anywhere.
Ms. Ryder, this is very important Did you call the police once you thought your daughter was missing?
No, I didn't. I was a felon, and I am, and I just didn't want them to come and look at me and arrest me. I thought I was in violation of parole because technically I wasn't the legal custodian of Parker. My brother Corbin was, and I knew that realistically I shouldn't have taken on her on that camping trip without him, but I just needed to be with her. So no, I didn't call the police. I wanted to find her on my own. I just needed more time.
Ms. Ryder, when you were arrested by Detective Chesney, did Detective Chesney ever ask you any questions about your parole during the interrogation?
No. I thought that I needed a lawyer because I thought that I was going to have to go to court for my parole violation.
Thank you. At this time, Your Honor, I have no further questions.
There's something in the defense committee with questions there?
Yes, Your Honor.